We've been building to this for 16 episodes. While all the games we've gone over thus far have certainly had their important place in video game history, none have been so wildly popular as Super Mario Bros. The end of 1985 is near.
Let's go!
There's no understating how integral Super Mario Bros. Was to the NES's initial success. Unfortunately, I can't talk about specific dates in regards to its release or reception. Super Mario has perhaps the most contested release date of any black box game. Frank Cifaldi's fantastic article goes into detail on this, but to summarize, the test market launch of the NES in America was documented by Nintendo to be October 18, 1985. Unfortunately, there's no way to substantiate this date, so take it with a grain of salt. Matte sticker-sealed copies of Mario, while rare, do exist. This was characteristic of test market NES games, so we can gather that Super Mario Bros. Did come out in 1985. Some sources, like this Macy's ad, say it launched with the system. Consoles from this period of early Nintendo history had very low serial numbers, between 0 and 100,000, and included the game pack for Super Mario Bros. As a sweepstakes prize on their warranties. And yet, pinning it down to an exact date in 85 is impossible. It could have shipped after the rest of the games, as it launched in Japan in September of that same year, and there was typically a fair amount of wait time before the US got their version of the game. It could have shipped at the same time as the rest of the set. We have no idea, but the important part is that we know it came out in 1985. So I can certainly still analyze its importance in regard to the NES test market success. While the early stages of its advertising may have centered around Rob and the light gun, Nintendo of America ceased the promotion of Duck Hunt and Gyromite once they realized how popular Super Mario was becoming. No matter how good their marketing was, they would still need to achieve that one key title that would sell their system. This phenomenon can be seen throughout history. In the second generation, being able to play Pac-Man at home, no matter how poor the quality was, sold the Atari 2600. Halo sold the Xbox. Wii Sports sold the Wii, and so on. About twice as fast as the sluggish Rob the Robot could get into the ready position, kids' interest in the device faded. Super Mario had already drawn their attention, and it's not hard to see why. Mario was intended to be the final boss, so to speak, of Famicom cart-based games. The Famicom Disk System, a Japanese exclusive add-on that allowed for enhancements to audio, graphical quality, and size of games, was slated for release in late 1985 or early 1986. This project would be the last of the so-called first generation of Famicom games, and the team working on Super Mario wanted to go out with a bang. Designer Shigeru Miyamoto pulled ideas from many of his previous works. Devil World, his first console game, was his initial introduction to horizontal versus vertical scrolling. While Excite Bike may have been a racing game, the quick thinking required to achieve a fast time pulled many concepts from platformers like Donkey Kong. Players would fly off of massive jumps, having to remain balanced upon landing and takeoff. They'd have control over their speed when moving from left to right, experiencing a smooth increase from slow to fast over a short time. And notably, this movement was accompanied by smooth side-scrolling that helped reacting to upcoming obstacles feel natural. His last pre-Super Mario work, Kung Fu, combined the ideas of jumping, side-scrolling, and combat into one game. Unlike Excite Bike, which scrolled in one direction until the end of a level, Kung Fu switched up the directions on each floor. Players would be able to move backwards and forwards through stages as they pleased. While it might not be much of an adventure, it did allow for a level of exploration that had not previously existed. Jumping added to the verticality of this exploration, and combat made sure that the player would have to constantly be planning their next moves, or succumb to an enemy. All three of these quote athletic games, as Miyamoto called them, lay the foundations for Mario's design. But we mustn't forget about the unsung heroes of Super Mario Bros., the programmers. While it's easy to track the progression of design between these three titles, it's also important to recognize how Mario was developed from a technical standpoint. The two main programmers of Super Mario, Kazuaki Morita and Toshihiko Nakago, developed their skills through several titles. While Nakago worked with Miyamoto on the likes of Excite Bike, Morita's first game was Ice Climber. As Morita recalled, this was the warm-up for Super Mario Bros., and it can certainly be felt in the jump physics of the game. But we'll get to that later. It was Nakago and Morita's job to translate Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka's concept into tangible code, and they did a fantastic job. Even though Super Mario Bros. Sounds like a sequel to Mario Bros., the arcade title that was released 2 years prior, they actually have very little in common. It took the titular character and his brother, Luigi, for two-player modes. It had similar aesthetics in the underground stages, including pipes and reptilian enemies, and it utilized similar methods of combat, having players punch blocks above them to defeat foes. But that's about where the similarities stop. Everything else Super Mario Bros. Brought to the table was entirely original, from its sprawling worlds to its colorful power-ups. Speaking of, Mario consists of 8 separate worlds, with 4 substages each. And to put it simply, the level design is masterful. The first of these acts as a basic tutorial. The player is placed into an open area starting on the left side of the screen. The whole first level has a constant push to the right. Pipes lead to the right. All mushrooms that come from blocks would move to the right, and most coins were situated in a path leading right. Enemies, on the other hand, would move towards the player from right to left. Upon realizing that the screen doesn't scroll backwards, players would be prompted to jump over them, to the right, to avoid any danger. The first thing players are greeted by is a mushroom with angry eyes waddling right towards them. It's immediately clear what they have to do: avoid the creature. Upon continuing onwards, they'd notice a series of blocks. The flashing question marks invited them to be hit below via jump, which would reward players with a power-up or some coins. A little further to the right, a series of pipes would scroll on screen, and, well, why wouldn't you try to go down one? This introduces the concept of subworlds, and is the first of many secrets hidden throughout the expansive levels. Super Mario Bros. Was far from the first game to implement these ideas, but it was the first to do so in a way that was friendly to the average person. No prior knowledge was required to figure out how to get underground. No special button combination was necessary, and no ultra-specific hidden block would have to be destroyed. The collision on the pipe itself was actually quite large. Players could stand nearly anywhere near the center and still get sucked down. Now, this isn't to say that there were no elaborate secrets in Super Mario, but its genius lies in part with its stellar prediction of players' behavior. The developers knew that players would try to get on top of the level in level 1-2, and rewarded them for it with a warp area, letting them get to later worlds. They put hidden blocks in areas that just begged to be jumped into, revealing extra coins. Certain obvious blocks, when hit, would spawn a vine, transporting players into a Jack-and-the-Beanstalk-esque environment, letting them run on clouds and collect coins to their heart's content. And some of the secrets would only be discovered by veterans of the game, or those who had just jumped around randomly. Believe it or not, random jumping was something that probably happened quite often. The jump physics in Super Mario were unlike anything that had come before it. It actually felt right. Gone were the days of fixed horizontal jumping, like in Donkey Kong, or frustrating jump arcs like in Mario Bros. Or Ice Climber. Jumping in Super Mario Bros. Allowed players to change their momentum in mid-air. When jumping from a standstill, tapping forward arced Mario just slightly to the right. Holding it would send him further. Walking and jumping got more distance than this, but running and jumping let him jump nearly a third of the screen's length. Things we take for granted nowadays, like speeding up gradually while dashing or being able to jump on top of a block situated directly above you by shifting momentum in midair, got their start in Mario. The change in RUD speed is particularly notable. The game was developed on the same engine used for Excitebike, which allowed for smooth acceleration. The movement feels great and holds up amazingly well over 35 years later. The design of Mario built on itself throughout the game. Stages would introduce concepts that would later be explored in further depth, and, as the game progressed, would stack with other concepts in new and exciting ways. For instance, while level 1-2 first showed off continuously rising and falling platforms, 3-3 took the idea to the next level with weight-sensitive platforms and balance lifts. 2-2 was the first underwater level, utilizing the same physics that Satoru Iwata coded into Balloon Fight, that introduced the basics of swimming, while 7-2 utilized the same layout but added more bloopers to up the challenge. Super Mario wasn't the first game to implement side-scrolling effectively. Williams Electronics' Defender used it in tandem with shooting, and Jump Bug is widely seen as the first side-scrolling platformer. Pac-Land, which came out in 1984, is perhaps the most similar to Super Mario in its mechanics and concept. Miyamoto actually told Toru Iwatani, the lead developer on Pac-Land, how influential his work was, at least according to Iwatani himself. Regardless of the statement's truth, Super Mario Bros. Wasn't breaking new ground, but it was the most refined version of the platforming concept. It gathered what worked and made the best version of it that could be made on the system available. I could spend several more hours analyzing the genius of the enemies and level design, or going into depth on Koji Kondo's masterpiece of a score, but this has already been done by minds much more qualified than mine. Super Mario Bros. Was the best-selling game on the NES. It's the reason why people gave the console a chance and was the subject of nearly all of Nintendo's promotional material in the 1986 and early 1987 seasons, at least before The Legend of Zelda released. Just to reiterate, Nintendo used this one game as its main selling point for the NES for 2 entire years. That's an eon in early video game history terms, if you remember the fact that, just 2 years before Mario came out, the entire video game market imploded. Nintendo put Mario on every type of memorabilia imaginable. He was the main subject of the first 2 publications of the Nintendo Fun Club magazine in early and mid-1987, featuring massive Q&A sections on how to beat certain sections of the game. There really is no way to overstate how big of a deal Mario was. A man who got his origins as a carpenter rescuing his girlfriend from his pet gorilla was now a character more popular than Mickey Mouse. Of course, the many hours that kids spent on the game caused concern among parents. Although not the first instance of video game addiction hysteria, there certainly were worries. Some news stations were trying to portray the sudden influx in children talking about and playing Mario as the beginnings of a nationwide Mario epidemic.
Watching the kids play, seeing the intensity of their interest, the word obsession comes to mind.
Nothing really came of this but a few funny news segments, but all of the added advertising probably helped to sell the game even more. As soon as the first NES system bundles stopped selling in stores, Nintendo began packaging consoles with Super Mario Bros. Carts, and then combo carts of it and Duck Hunt. This helped Mario to become the best-selling game on the NES, and one of the best-selling console video games of all time. This isn't to say that it didn't sell well on its own. Super Mario Bros. Is one of the only black box games that has a lineup of 11 individual box prints, meaning that the standalone copy must have sold immensely well. Speaking to the impact of such a game is a difficult feat. Countless titles that followed Mario utilized a similar design not because they were intending to copy it, but because it literally laid a new groundwork for what video games were, what they'd look like, what they'd sound like, and how they'd interact with players. Super Mario Bros. Kicked off the 3rd generation of game consoles in America. It's the reason why Nintendo became a household name, and it's the standout title of the black box set.